What happens when fame becomes a curse, and the spotlight blinds more than it shines? This is 20 Worst Celebs Who Drugged Themselves to Death, a raw, unfiltered look at stars who rose high and crashed hard. These aren't just overdoses, they're tragic endings fueled by fame, pressure, and pills. From icons like Marilyn Monroe to rising stars like River Phoenix, each name carries a chilling story. Stick with us till the end as we reveal how Hollywood's brightest lights burned out in the darkest ways. You've heard the rumors. Now, hear the truth behind the headlines. Let's begin. Judy Garland, the broken dream behind the rainbow. She danced down a yellow brick road, but Judy Garland's real path was anything but golden. Cast as Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz at just 16, she became a symbol of innocence and wonder for generations. But behind the wide eyes and trembling voice was a young girl trapped in a nightmare of control, exploitation, and chemical dependency. The studio system didn't nurture Judy. It consumed her. MGM executives dictated everything, from her diet to her demeanor. To keep her thin, they gave her amphetamines. To make her sleep, barbiturates. To keep her compliant, pressure. A child working adult hours, fueled by pills and fear, she was told she wasn't pretty enough, thin enough, or good enough. And she believed them. The adoration of millions couldn't repair the damage done in private. Multiple failed marriages, a constant struggle with her weight, and a yearning for unconditional love haunted her into adulthood. She gave electrifying performances in A Star is Born and Meet Me in St. Louis, but the offstage torment always followed. There were hospitalizations, breakdowns, and cruel tabloid headlines. She clawed her way back again and again, desperate to feel wanted, if not as a star, then simply as a common being. But Judy never outran the ghosts the studios placed inside her. In 1969, at just 47, she was found dead in a London bathroom from an overdose of barbiturates. Officially ruled accidental, it was anything but surprising. Judy Garland died not as a Hollywood icon, but as a casualty of a system that glamorized her suffering and sold her pain. And as the curtain fell on her life, Hollywood simply moved on to its next shining star, its next sacrifice. Marilyn Monroe, Hollywood's most tragic icon. If Judy Garland was the broken dream, Marilyn Monroe was the dream itself, radiant, unattainable, and doomed to vanish. She played the role of the dumb blonde to perfection in Some Like It Hot and Gentlemen Prefer Blondes. But behind that breathy voice was a tormented soul, aching with loneliness and self-doubt. Born Norma Jean Mortensen, she rose from foster homes and abuse to become the most desired woman on earth. But fame wasn't love. It was a spotlight that seared her vulnerabilities into the public eye. She struggled with depression and an endless parade of pills, barbiturates to sleep, amphetamines to wake, sedatives to numb. The men in her life, from Joe DiMaggio to Arthur Miller, couldn't fix what was broken inside. She became both muse and joke, icon and enigma. Directors called her unreliable. Studios labeled her difficult. But the truth was simpler. She was sick, and no one was listening. The glamorous life masked a collapsing world where she couldn't tell friend from handler, fantasy from reality. On August 5, 1962, Marilyn was found face down in her bed, empty pill bottles strewn nearby. She was 36. The cause, acute barbiturate poisoning. Whether suicide or accident, the result was the same. Hollywood had lost its most glittering star and gained a legend. From the rubble of her life rose a myth so potent it still casts a shadow today. Elvis Presley, the king who couldn't escape the crown. He changed music forever, but in the end, even Elvis couldn't save himself. The boy from Tupelo, Mississippi, rocketed to global fame with a snarl, a swivel, and a sound that rewrote American culture. But the crown came with a cost. and Elvis Presley bore its weight until it broke him. He served his country, dazzled Las Vegas, and sold millions of records. But the man who sang Heartbreak Hotel was quietly breaking. Chronic pain, insomnia, and the grueling pressure to perform left him at the mercy of prescription pills. Doctors became drug dealers in white coats. The Memphis Mafia, his entourage, enabled him, shielding the world from just how far he'd fallen. By the 1970s, Elvis was a shell of his former self. Bloated, incoherent, and addicted to a pharmacy's worth of medications, he stumbled through performances like a ghost wearing rhinestones. Behind the gates of Graceland, the king of rock and roll lived in isolation, dependent on a cocktail of painkillers, sedatives, and amphetamines. On August 16, 1977, Elvis was found unresponsive in his bathroom. He was 42. The official cause was cardiac arrest, but the toxicology report painted a bleaker picture: a body drowning in prescription drugs. The king had died not on stage, but in a private purgatory of his own making. And so, with one final thud on a bathroom floor, the American dream lost another of its brightest lights. River Phoenix, the lost boy of Hollywood. He was supposed to be the future. With haunting eyes and raw talent, River Phoenix captivated the world in Stand By Me, Running on Empty, and My Own Private Idaho. Sensitive, soft-spoken, and strikingly beautiful, he was hailed as the James Dean of his generation. But like Dean, River didn't get to grow old. Born into a nomadic, unconventional family, River was acting by 10, famous by 15, and burned out before 20. Hollywood adored him, but he never fully belonged there. He was vegan, anti-establishment, and deeply idealistic. But beneath the angelic image, he struggled with identity, pressure, and growing rumors of drug use. In 1993, outside the Viper Room nightclub, co-owned by Johnny Depp, River collapsed on the sidewalk while his younger siblings, including Joaquin Phoenix, looked on in horror. He was convulsing, vomiting, dying. The autopsy confirmed it. A speedball of heroin and cocaine had stopped his heart. He was 23. River's death was a punch to the gut of a generation who believed he might save Hollywood from itself. But in the end, it was Hollywood that consumed him. His loss remains a haunting what-if in the story of cinema. What if River had lived? What could he have become? But there would be no next act. His story ended that night on Sunset Boulevard, under the neon glow of a club meant for stars. Jean Seberg, the shattered starlet. In Breathless, she was the face of a cinematic revolution, cool, poised, and unforgettable. But behind Jean Seberg's pixie cut and French New Wave mystique was a woman unraveling piece by piece. Her life, once the stuff of celluloid dreams, became a harrowing study in paranoia, political persecution, and profound loneliness. Born in Iowa and plucked from obscurity for St. Joan, Seberg was cast into a spotlight she never asked for. She flourished in European cinema, but her off-screen activism made her a target. In the late 1960s, she donated to civil rights causes, including the Black Panther Party, a decision that would lead to her destruction at the hands of the FBI. J. Edgar Hoover's COINTELPRO program launched a brutal campaign of psychological warfare. They spread lies that she was pregnant by a Black Panther leader, leaked it to the press, and watched her spiral. Her mental health shattered. She gave birth prematurely to a child who died days later. She never recovered. Depression and pill use followed. She withdrew from public life, became erratic, and relied on barbiturates and alcohol to dull the pain. On September 8, 1979, Seberg was found dead in her car in Paris. It took days for her body to be discovered. Official cause: probable suicide by overdose. Jean Seberg had been silenced, not by obscurity, but by a government that considered her compassion a threat. And in the end, the actress who defined rebellion, died utterly alone. John Belushi, comedy's wildest flame. If laughter is the best medicine, John Belushi overdosed on it. Bursting into America's living rooms through Saturday Night Live, he wasn't just funny, he was explosive, unpredictable, ellev. From Animal House to the Blues Brothers, Belushi wasn't acting. He was chaos wrapped in charisma. But behind the manic energy and rock star partying, a darker hunger pulsed through him, one that would not be satisfied by applause alone. He drank deep from Hollywood's cup, fame, fortune, and every drug within arm's reach. Cocaine was his rocket fuel, heroin his crutch, and the two together, known as a speedball, became his signature cocktail. Friends warned him. Producers begged him to slow down. But Belushi was a storm no one could contain. By 1982, he had isolated himself in a bungalow at the Chateau Marmont, a castle for the broken-hearted elite. His last night was a blur of visitors, syringes, and the actress who would later confess to giving him his final hit. When his body was found the next morning, cold and alone, the autopsy confirmed what many feared. Belushi had overdosed at just 33 years old. Hollywood had seen rising stars crash before. But this one hurt differently. Maybe because he made us laugh while he cried. Maybe because he burned so brightly. Or maybe because the next generation would follow his same doomed path. Because, tragically, someone else was already tracing his footsteps and wouldn't live past the same cursed age. Dorothy Dandridge, Hollywood's forgotten pioneer before. Halle Berry accepted her Oscar. She whispered a name. Dorothy Dandridge. Once called the Black Marilyn Monroe, Dandridge was more than a symbol. She was a revelation. Stunning, talented, and dignified, she shattered barriers with her Oscar-nominated role in Carmen Jones. But even trailblazers can be buried beneath the very road they pave. In a town that only saw color in the margins, Dandridge fought for roles worthy of her gifts. Too light for some, too black for others. Hollywood didn't know what to do with her, and it showed. The offers dried up, the marriages failed, and the loneliness came knocking. She turned to pills not for euphoria, but for silence. To dull the ache of betrayal, not just from lovers or studios, but from an entire industry that celebrated her for a moment, then cast her aside. Depression settled like dust on her legacy, coating every unreturned call, every declined audition. In 1965, she was found dead in her Los Angeles apartment. She was just 42. The cause, varroes, an overdose of antidepressants, deemed accidental. But in a way, the damage had long been done. Dandridge didn't die of drugs. She died of heartbreak, of erasure, of being too ahead of her time. And like so many women of color in Hollywood, her genius went unprotected until it was too late. Heath Ledger, a star gone too soon. Heath Ledger didn't play characters, he became them. From the aching tenderness of Brokeback Mountain to the terrifying chaos of The Dark Knight, he was a chameleon of the highest order. But the deeper he dove into his roles, the harder it became to resurface. Ledger was a paradox. Wildly gifted, wildly private. Fame never sat comfortably on his shoulders. He craved authenticity in an industry addicted to illusion. Sleep eluded him. Peace was a stranger, and soon prescription pills became his nightly lullaby. He was just finishing The Dark Knight, a role so intense it left him rattled and restless. Friends described him as exhausted, detached. He had trouble sleeping, took Ambien, painkillers, anti-anxiety meds, often in dangerous combinations, not to chase a high, but just to stop thinking. On January 22, 2008, a housekeeper found Heath Ledger face down in his New York apartment. He was 28. The autopsy revealed a lethal mix of oxycodone, diazepam, and other sedatives. His death was ruled accidental, but it felt like a calculated surrender to a life moving too fast. The world mourned. The Joker would go on to win him a posthumous Oscar. But no award could soften the blow. Another prodigy had been lost, not to street drugs, but to the quiet tyranny of legal pills. The kind handed out by doctors. The kind that whisper instead of shout. And once again, Hollywood asked itself, how many more must we lose before we learn? Carol Landis, the sadness behind the glamour. She had the look, the figure, the smile that lit up every USO stage during World War II. Carol Landis wasn't just a pin-up girl. She was a lifeline to soldiers dreaming of home. But while she gave hope to millions, she could never quite find her own. Landis was a woman caught between eras, too smart for the roles she was offered, too bold for the men who tried to control her. She dated powerful men, including a married Rex Harrison, and believed love might save her from the gnawing feeling that she was always disposable. But when love failed and the studios stopped calling, Carol's world dimmed. Depression crept in. She had already attempted suicide once, but the second time, she meant it. On July 5, 1948, after dining with Harrison, she took a lethal dose of Seconal sleeping pills and left behind a note. She was 29 years old. The tragedy of Carol Landis is the tragedy of so many women who dared to be more than decoration in an industry that wanted them silent, obedient, and smiling. Her death was mourned, but quickly forgotten, her legacy reduced to a footnote. And Hollywood kept moving, oblivious to the truth that some stars don't burn out, they're quietly extinguished. Chris Farley, the tragedy of laughter. Chris Farley was a walking contradiction, a tornado of joy, hiding a core of despair. On Saturday Night Live, he played buffoons and underdogs with such wild abandon you could forget for a moment how much he needed that laughter to survive. But once the lights dimmed, the silence was unbearable. He idolized John Belushi. Same show, same manic energy, same demons. It was a prophecy, and Farley knew it. Addiction wasn't his secret. It was his shadow. Rehab stints became routine. Friends like David Spade and Lorne Michaels tried to help, but fame had already tethered him to self-destruction. His body bore the cost. Obesity, heart issues, a ravaged immune system, and still the audience cheered. The industry enabled him, booked him, praised him, even as he fell apart in plain sight. He was the punchline and the warning. On December 18, 1997, he was found dead in his Chicago apartment, collapsed next to a prostitute, clutching a rosary. Cocaine and morphine, a speedball, took his life. He was 33, just like Belushi. Chris Farley didn't die from drugs. He died from a world that demands its clowns never stop dancing, even when they're bleeding. His death was both a mirror and a monument, reflecting everything that is broken in the way Hollywood treats those who make us laugh. And yet, the show went on. Anna Nicole Smith, The Price of Chasing Fame. From a Texas diner waitress to a global tabloid fixation, Anna Nicole Smith lived a life scripted like a fever dream, glamour, scandal, and tragedy playing out in slow motion. She was the fantasy incarnate, platinum hair, bombshell curves, and an almost desperate hunger to be seen, adored, remembered. But chasing fame is like chasing smoke, and Anna Nicole never caught it, only its choking aftermath. She rocketed to fame as a Playboy playmate and guest model, a modern-day Marilyn Monroe for the 1990s. But it was her marriage to 89-year-old oil tycoon J. Howard Marshall that made her a media spectacle. The whispers never stopped. Gold digger, joke, hot mess. No one asked what it cost to live under such scrutiny. What they didn't see, what the paparazzi couldn't capture, was the crippling grief after her son Daniel died of an overdose in her hospital room, just days after she gave birth to her daughter. That loss shattered her. Pills dulled the pain, methadone, anti-anxiety meds, sleeping pills. swirled together by the handful, each prescription a brick in the tomb she was building around herself. On February 8, 2007, Anna Nicole Smith was found unresponsive in a Florida hotel suite. The room was a pharmacy. The cause of death, a lethal mix of chloral hydrate and benzodiazepines. She was 39. Her death was as tragic as her life was public. A woman who wanted to be loved like Marilyn, remembered like a goddess, gone, like so many before her, in a haze of sorrow and sedatives. And her final wish? To rest beside her son. Montgomery Clift, the self-destructive heartthrob. He was the original tortured heartthrob. Montgomery Clift brought raw vulnerability to the screen in A Place in the Sun, From Here to Eternity, and Judgment at Nuremberg. In an era of polished leading men, Clift bled emotion, aching, honest, haunted. But the pain he portrayed wasn't performance. It was personal. He was one of the few actors who lived a double life so carefully that it seemed to tear him in half. A closeted gay man in 1950s Hollywood, Clift carried the weight of secrets in a town built on illusion. And when a near-fatal car crash in 1956 disfigured his face, something in him broke. Physically, emotionally, spiritually. He spiraled into addiction, painkillers, alcohol, and self-loathing. Friends described his final decade as the longest suicide in Hollywood history. The roles slowed, the charm faded, and the man once called the most beautiful face on film retreated into shadows and silence. On July 23, 1966, at just 45, Montgomery Clift died of a heart attack. But the autopsy told a deeper story. Decades of drug abuse and emotional turmoil had ravaged his body. He didn't die of vanity or vice. He died of the unbearable cost of being himself in a world that wouldn't let him. In the end, Clift gave us performances etched in pain and lived a life that proved some masks are heavier than any role. Philip Seymour Hoffman, the acting genius we lost. He wasn't movie star beautiful, but Philip Seymour Hoffman was one of the most mesmerizing actors of his generation. From Capote to The Master, he didn't just play characters, he dismantled them, lived in them, exposed them like raw nerves. But behind his meticulous craft was a soul in constant battle. Hoffman had long struggled with addiction. In his early 20s, he sought sobriety and stayed clean for decades. Then, quietly, devastatingly, he relapsed. At the height of his success, with an Oscar under his belt and 3 children at home, he slid back into the darkness he had once conquered. He checked into rehab in 2013, and for a moment, it seemed he might pull himself back. But demons don't care about accolades or applause. In his final months, he was seen looking gaunt, withdrawn, and tired in a way that didn't just suggest exhaustion. It hinted at surrender. On February 2, 2014, Hoffman was found dead in his New York apartment, a syringe in his arm, 50 envelopes of heroin nearby. He was 46. The autopsy revealed a cocktail of heroin, cocaine, amphetamines, and benzodiazepines. The loss was seismic. Hollywood mourned not just a talent, but a truth-teller. Hoffman's characters had always been broken, messy, human, and now we knew why. Because so was he. Tallulah Bankhead, the original Hollywood rebel. She was the southern storm who blew into Hollywood like a hurricane, bold, bawdy, and unforgettable. Tallulah Bankhead lived loud. She smoked 2 packs a day, drank like a pirate, and delivered one-liners like gunshots. But beneath the bravado was a woman unraveling, undone by loneliness, addiction, and the cruelty of fading fame. Bankhead was a theater legend and Hollywood provocateur. She starred in Hitchcock's Lifeboat, captivated society with her razor wit, and slept with whoever she pleased, men, women, or rumors. She was decades ahead of her time and paid the price for it. As the years passed, roles dried up. She became a punchline, a caricature of the flamboyant rebel she once was. Drugs entered the scene, sleeping pills, painkillers, and alcohol never left. The more she lost herself, the more she played the part of Tallulah until she no longer remembered the woman behind the name. In 1968, at the age of 66, she died from pneumonia, her immune system ravaged by decades of substance abuse. There was no dramatic death scene, no grand final act, just a silent fade-out of one of Hollywood's loudest women. And in that silence, we were reminded, even the brightest stars can vanish with barely a whisper. Whitney Houston. The voice silenced. Her voice was a miracle, a once-in-a-generation gift that could soar from gospel to pop without missing a beat. Whitney Houston was America's sweetheart, the queen of crossover, the woman who made The Bodyguard unforgettable. But the higher she climbed, the further she fell, and her descent was both public and excruciating. At first it was whispers, then rumors, then footage, a slurring Whitney, a shaking hand, a once golden voice reduced to rasp. Behind it all was a toxic marriage to Bobby Brown, a circus of enablers, and a terrifying dependence on crack cocaine, alcohol, and prescription drugs. She tried to come back. "I Look to You" hinted at resurrection. But the truth was harder. Years of abuse, substance and emotional, had wrecked her voice, her body, her spirit. And though she kept smiling, the pain was never gone. It haunted every interview, every performance, every breath. On February 11, 2012, just hours before a scheduled appearance at Clive Davis's Grammy party, Whitney was found submerged in her hotel bathtub. The cause? Accidental drowning, complicated by heart disease and chronic cocaine use. She was 48. The world wept. And as I Will Always Love You played once again, we realized that Whitney hadn't just been a singer. She had been a symbol of greatness, of fragility, and of how even angels can fall. David Ruffin, The Temptations' fallen angel. He was the golden voice behind My Girl, the towering frontman who took Motown to church and the world to its feet. David Ruffin didn't just sing, he bled soul. With every rasp, every high note, he etched heartbreak into history. But like so many stars forged in fire, he couldn't outrun the flames. Success came fast and hot. Ruffin, with his signature glasses and gospel roots, became a cornerstone of the Temptations. But ego and addiction slowly eroded the harmony. Cocaine became his muse and his undoing. He was fired from the group in 1968, and though he tried to launch a solo career, the drugs always followed. There were arrests, rehabs, comeback attempts that glimmered, then collapsed. He'd show up to concerts high, disappear for days, burn bridges as fast as he built them. Friends described him as sweet and volatile, charming and tragic. On June 1, 1991, Ruffin stumbled into a Philadelphia hospital, unresponsive after a night of drug use. He died shortly after. Cause of death: an overdose of crack cocaine. He was 50. The man who once promised "ain't too proud to beg" died with barely a whisper. And yet, his voice, timeless, aching, still plays on, reminding us that even angels fall hardest when they try to fly too high. Michael Jackson, the king of pop's final sleep. He was a global phenomenon, a moonwalking messiah, a man-child sculpted by fame and fear. Michael Jackson redefined music, dance, and spectacle, but his final years were a slow-motion unraveling. From the heights of Thriller to the silence of surgical masks and courtrooms, the king of pop became a ghost in his own Neverland. Behind closed doors, his life was a labyrinth of insomnia, chronic pain, and desperate attempts to escape his own body. He turned to medicine, dangerous medicine, sedatives for sleep. Propofol, an anesthetic used for surgeries, became his nightly ritual. On June 25, 2009, the world stopped. Jackson was dead. His heart gave out after a lethal dose of propofol administered not by a back-alley dealer, but by his personal physician. He was 50. The irony was brutal. A man who wanted to feel nothing, no pain, no pressure, died trying to sleep. And when he closed his eyes that final time, he left behind not just a grieving world, but a chilling legacy. Fame without boundaries can be fatal. Hedy Lamarr. Beauty, brilliance, and a hidden addiction. They called her the most beautiful woman in the world. But Hedy Lamarr was more than a face. She was a mind, an inventor, a pioneer whose ideas helped shape modern Wi-Fi. Yet even brilliance can't protect against loneliness, and beauty fades in a town that trades in youth. After Samson and Delilah, Hollywood stopped calling. She withdrew from the world, undergoing a carousel of plastic surgeries and slipping into the shadows. Pills helped ease the silence. Over time, those pills took more than they gave. Hedy Lamarr died quietly in 2000 at age 85. No overdose, no scandal. But years of pill dependency had chipped away her health, her memory, her spark. A woman who once lit up the screen was reduced to whispers and obituaries, and still, her legacy pulses in every smartphone, an echo of a mind Hollywood never celebrated until it was too late. Corey Monteith, a young star crushed by fame. He was the heart of Glee, the boy next door who made vulnerability look brave. Corey Monteith's smile was warm, his voice sincere, and his struggle with addiction carefully hidden behind studio lights and scripted optimism. But off-screen, he was fighting a war he thought he'd won. Corey had entered rehab as a teenager and relapsed in his 20s. Despite support from fans, friends, and his co-star girlfriend, Lea Michele, he couldn't stay clean. He wanted help. He sought it. But the pull of addiction is cunning, relentless. On July 13, 2013, Corey was found dead in a Vancouver hotel room. Heroin and alcohol, the same lethal mix that had taken so many before him. He was 31. The loss was staggering, not just because he was young, but because he had almost made it. He had talent. He had love. But addiction doesn't care. And as Glee continued without him, so did the heartbreak. Amy Winehouse, the final song of a damaged genius. Her voice was a thunderstorm, raw, brassy, defiant. Amy Winehouse didn't just sing the blues, she was the blues. Back to Black wasn't an album, it was a confession, a cry for help soaked in heartbreak and liquor. The world watched her unravel, and the cameras never looked away. Addicted to chaos, to love, to the bottle, Amy spiraled in real time. Paparazzi trailed her stumbles. Fans begged her to stop. She tried. She failed. Rehab wasn't a chorus. It was a curse she couldn't escape. On July 23, 2011, Amy was found alone in her Camden flat. Blood alcohol levels over 5 times the legal limit. She was 27, forever a member of that cursed club, young, brilliant, and gone too soon. In the silence that followed, we finally heard the pain behind the voice, and we realized Amy Winehouse didn't self-destruct. She was watched into oblivion,